Welcome back to your Monday Buckeye Talk from cleveland.com. It's NFL Draft Week, and we are drafting Ohio State football players. We do this every year. We say, hey, it's like we're in war rooms. You got to buzz in and get the guy before somebody else on this podcast gets the guy. We'll have more draft coverage this week, some more stories about Ohio State players. Our plan is for a full cleveland.com staff first-round mock draft that should be up on Tuesday. That will include our Browns writers, our Bengals writers, some of us, our Tim Bielek, our NFL draft guy, all that kind of stuff. But for now, we are drafting Ohio State players, where we think they will go. And that starts with C.J. Stroud. And that starts with an evolving C.J. Stroud conversation. And let's draft him first. And then we can talk about this, because this conversation has definitely evolved. So Doug Lesmerises here with Nathan Baird and Stephen Means. I will just move us through the draft order. When you want to draft the guy, just say buzz, I don't know, whistle, make a noise, and then you'll get the guy.
But it's a prediction of where we think he will get drafted.
So it is a will / what you would do, I mean, we shouldn't have anyone drafting Ronnie Hickman number 16 in the first round, just 'cause we think Ronnie Hickman's a cool guy. But I think it could be some combination of,
okay.
Oh man.
We're not that Ronnie Hickman's not a cool guy. We're not here to pretend that we're NFL draft experts, but we are experts on the Ohio State players. We honestly are. I mean, I've definitely felt this over time, and I'm sure you guys have too, that NFL teams do things, and there are just moments when I'm like, well, if they just would have asked someone who covered this guy for 4 years or 3 years or whatever, I could have given them some insight to say, hey, I think you did this too early. I think you did this too late. I was telling, it's the only thing I ever got. It's like, I'm screaming at teams to draft Michael Thomas. Like, what are you doing? Like, don't draft Corey Coleman. Don't draft, these other weird, like Michael Thomas is going to be legit. They just didn't throw the ball enough to him. So like that kind of thing, we know this stuff and we know these guys sometimes. I wouldn't have taken Eli Apple 10th in the draft. No offense to Eli Apple. Doesn't mean he's not a first round player. And he's turned out to be, he's had a long NFL career. I don't think he wound up, I don't think 10th was where he needed to go. So anyway, that kind of thing. We know these guys, so that's okay. So let's do it. Selecting number one in the NFL draft are the Carolina Panthers, who have made a trade from number 9 to number 1. Number 1, Carolina. Number 2, Houston.
Bing.
Okay. Let's start this conversation. Let's start it here. Why were the three of us silent at number 1 for the Carolina Panthers when, Nathan, there was a time, and I was looking at betting odds on this, and you cannot, not on my apps, the ones that I have 3 betting apps in the state of Ohio, and I swear to, I don't know if it's trolling me. 2 of the 3 betting apps that I have on my phone, they don't have anything for the NFL draft. I haven't checked in like a week. I swear I'm not lying. The only player that one of the sites had listed as you could draft, like bet on where he's going to be drafted, was Stetson Bennett. I could not believe it. Why is this the only guy in the state of Ohio you can bet on? Are you kidding me? We should at least be linked to that. It's the Buckeye Talk Stetson Bennett special or something. All these podcasts have betting deals. Bet on Stetson Bennett. But
maybe it's that thing where like now our phones are listening to us and they knew that you would only want to bet on where Stetson Bennett is going.
Yeah, so it's just, I'm the only person in America who could bet on where Stetson Bennett's going to be picked. So I will tell you, so there's all these things you see, like talking on betting sites. Hey, the odds. It's like, well, I don't know who's betting on these things. On April 10th, the site that I found that was like sort of, I think, gathering some betting numbers. On March 13th, I'll start there. On March 13th, according to this site, CJ was minus 200, basically, to be the first pick, which is heavy odds. Bryce Young was 3-1. So CJ was an odds-on favorite, less than even money. CJ Stroud, first pick, Bryce Young, 3-1. A week ago, April 10th, they were basically even. It was like a toss-up, at like almost an even money toss-up. CJ Stroud or Bryce Young to be the first pick. What you're seeing now is Bryce Young is an overwhelming minus 1,000 favorite to be the first pick, Nathan. And CJ's like 8-1. So I don't know what has changed other than NFL draft insiders perhaps getting leaks from Carolina or from agents that, hey, the Panthers have made their decision and it's Bryce Young. I certainly think that reporting, that analysis has affected the three of us as we sit here. When I did this probably like a month ago now, I got to find my own story. I did an Ohio State mock draft, and I had CJ first. It was soon after Carolina traded up. And none of us took him one here, Nathan. Why did none of us pick CJ Stroud first to the Panthers?
No, I think if we had done this the day after Ohio State's pro day, I might have also had him number one. But I've been influenced by the chatter that's out there, not the CJ Stroud specific chatter necessarily, the analysis of him, just the analysis of where people think the Panthers are going with this number one pick. And frankly, I don't know that there's a wrong pick at number one between these two guys. It just sounds like the Panthers are everything you're hearing out there is that this is their lean right now to go with Young at number one.
I think that's where I'm different from you guys. I don't think I was ever sold on CJ being the number one pick. I have just been operating as if that was Bryce Young's spot since the Bears traded the pick. I'll say that because reported Bears traded the pick. A lot of things are on the table, but it just felt like when that was happening with CJ and mock drafts were putting him number one, it just felt momentum based more than, I don't want to say reality based, but something that was actually going to happen because all that was post really awesome pro day, really awesome throwing performance at the combine. And so just
and Young
hadn't done momentum and Young didn't do anything, which is typical. Typically, we've seen that over the last couple of years where the perceived number one pick in the NFL draft goes to the combine and doesn't do anything but interviews. Joe Burrow did that. Trevor Lawrence probably would have done that had there been a combine that year. So on and on down the list from that point. It's not a new concept to do that. So I just felt like CJ did more to help himself while Bryce Young has just been Bryce Young for the past 4 months.
So the real discussion here now, I think, is could CJ Stroud wind up going much later than many people expect? And is this a Justin Fields conversation? And that right when the college football season ended 2 years ago, and you knew Trevor Lawrence was going to be the number one pick, and the Jets were set for that pick, and then they won a game late and kind of blew it. And I can remember tweeting this in the moment of like, hey, Jets fans, you blew it on Trevor Lawrence. Jacksonville's going to take him number one. Get to know the guy who's going to be your quarterback. Here's Justin Fields. And then the Jets themselves. And Zach Wilson winds up going two, and Trey Lance, the Niners trade up. And all of a sudden, it's like, why did they trade up? Who are they going to get? Maybe they're going to get Trey Lance. Maybe they're going to get Mac Jones. It feels like Justin Fields fell out of that conversation very quickly. Trey Lance goes third, and then Justin Fields winds up the fourth quarterback off the board, the 11 overall pick, and a team has to trade up to go get him. And along the way, Atlanta at 4, Detroit at 7, Carolina at 8, and Denver at 9. At that point, all of whom did not have sure things in their quarterback futures, all pass on Justin Fields. And you kind of watch it and you say, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know why they're doing this. And you can find mock drafts. We are at the point of mock draft saturation. And I'm not mocking mock draft saturation because mock drafts are awesome. We're going to do one. We're going to do a first round at cleveland.com with like 8 or 9 or 10 people from cleveland.com because they're just fun. But you can now find mock drafts where people are projecting CJ Stroud out of the top 2. And the question is do you think it's possible at all, Nathan, that we could be looking at something like a Justin Fields situation with CJ Stroud where there's a number one pick and then some teams pass / somebody decides they want Anthony Richardson instead of CJ Stroud. Somebody decides they want Will Levis instead of CJ Stroud. All of a sudden you have a Zach Wilson and a Trey Lance going ahead of Justin Fields. And now here we are. And who would you take second among those quarterbacks now? There's no question that behind Trevor Lawrence, you would take Justin Fields. Zach Wilson's already washed out. Trey Lance, the Niners might trade him to play Brock Purdy. You know, Mac Jones, there are reports that the Patriots who picked Mac Jones, I think 4 picks after Justin Fields, might be souring on Mac Jones. There were some people who would have taken Mac Jones ahead of Justin Fields. So I think this is worth talking about, Nathan, because there are some mockers who are doing this. But the interesting thing about this conversation is it's the exact opposite conversation. It's the same school, but I think the reasons that CJ would fall would be the opposite of the reasons that Justin fell. that it's no one's questioning Justin's athleticism out of the pocket. They're saying, hey, is he going to stay in the pocket and beat you? Nobody's questioning CJ's ability in the pocket to beat you, but they're wondering, is he athletic enough off platform? Yeah. Should it even be crossing our minds, Nathan, that CJ Stroud could go 7, 9, 11, something like happened to Justin Fields?
Sure. And for two reasons. And this links into, well, for one reason, but I wanted to get to something because I've been meaning to write it like all week and haven't had time. There's been a lot of new scuttlebutt around CJ in the last 3-4 days, right? A lot of, I don't know if you'd call them character concerns, but something getting out there about him not being that coachable. A lot of, and Greg Doyle from Indy Star, who I used to work with sort of a couple years ago, wrote a piece about the anonymous BS that comes out around, and I think, Doug, you've done some ranting about it too. The anonymous stuff that comes out around the NFL draft and how harmful it is, and people get to make these like hit and runs. And there was something related to Brady Quinn was bringing some stuff up that may have been related to the Manning Passing Academy. I don't know the whole story there. I haven't read it all.
It was a Manning thing.
Right. My point being, there were two things I wanted to bring up about that. Number one, some of that is misinformation. Some of that is stuff that is getting out there because teams want him to fall. And there are teams that have a vested interest in CJ Stroud falling past number 2. The other thing to remember is there are teams that are catastrophically bad at making this choice, at evaluating quarterbacks and picking franchise quarterbacks. There are teams that historically they do it over and over and over again. They're really bad at it. We may or may not cover one of them. So those are two things I want people to keep in mind as they hear these things this week. That some of it is misinformation. Some of it is legitimate bad analysis by teams that are bad at this. So that's why I'm still open to teams, because I think teams made a bad analysis about Justin Fields to let him fall that far. I know teams have made bad analysis. My Chicago Bears have made some pretty terrible analysis before that, trading up not to get Patrick Mahomes, not to get who else is in that class, Allen, like not to get Josh
Deshaun
Allen,
Watson.
to get Deshaun Watson, right?
It wasn't Josh Allen, Deshaun Watson.
Yeah,
right.
Watson.
Not to get Deshaun Watson, or not to get Patrick Mahomes, clearly a generational quarterback talent who's now been a Super Bowl mainstay, to get Mitch Trubisky. Like teams are bad at this. Some teams are really bad at this. Bears may have corrected their mistake, and I think it's very possible, very, very possible, that another team would make a mistake. I would not be shocked at all if he dropped past 2. Getting down to like 7 or 9 might be a little far. I don't know if he dropped quite that far. I think there's going to be enough teams that would be motivated to trade up and have the draft capital to trade up and do something there.
So, Stephen, where did you have him going? Where do you think CJ will be picked?
4 to the Colts. All right. So I agree with everything Nathan just said. Sometimes people overthink this process. And like with the Justin thing, it was Justin and Trevor were clearly the top 2 quarterbacks. Trevor first, Justin second. The last time anybody played football, and then nobody played football for 4 months, yet all of a sudden Justin Fields wasn't the second best quarterback in the class. Kind of the same thing here, where Bryce and CJ are the best quarterbacks the last time anybody played football, and then no one's played football for 4 months. Now all of a sudden things are starting to happen here. People are just overthinking the process. But that's putting the onus on some of these teams being idiots. It goes both ways, though, right? Because it's people in CJ Stroud's camp. It's their job to make sure that he goes as high as possible. It's also their job to make sure he gets into the best position possible to maximize his career. So I don't want to always just put it on the teams. Some of this can just be coming from CJ's camp or any other camp. Not some of the character stuff, but just the idea of him falling for, football reasons, because players have maneuvered things all the time, just like teams can maneuver things all the time. So I think with this situation, it's a little bit of both. And so that's why I went with Indianapolis, because they also need a quarterback, but it also puts CJ in a situation where it might maximize his career a little bit better, at least coming from his situation, how they might feel about things.
So we're not picking the whole draft, Stephen, but do you think that Houston would take another quarterback at 2?
I am no longer sold that they take another quarterback, which means I'm also not sold that they keep that pick. And that's what, so for me, I'm not sold that they would trade it to Detroit, who also, they might be sold on golf. So who knows if they trade it to Detroit and they end up taking a quarterback. But I'm I'm not sold Houston's going to take a quarterback. I'm not sold they take a pick. They keep the pick, and I'm not sold that if they do trade the pick, they would trade it to somebody who needs a quarterback. Because I think they just might like Caleb Williams or Drake May better, which is happens sometimes.
That's a great point, Stephen. I think with this entire class, you have to, depending on the franchise, you have to take Caleb Williams and Drake May as the expected top 2 quarterbacks a year from now into consideration. And if you are going to be a team that's going to stink again this year, DeMeco Ryans is locked in there as a defensive guy. I just have never thought that CJ at 2 to Houston felt right to me. And it's just, what do I know? I liked CJ in Carolina. And I think if CJ goes 1 to Carolina, I bet Houston takes Bryce number 2. But I always just think like a defensive head coach who has time. And they have assets because they have the Browns pick a year from now as well, which means you're probably going to stink again, but you can package your picks together and go get somebody. If you have the 5th pick next year, but you really want to try to go get Williams or May and maybe the team that has the 1st or 2nd, you're going to have ammo because they had all this extra stuff from the Watson trade. I've just never, and somebody else brought this up, Mike Renner from PFF. CJ has the same agent as Deshaun Watson, and that Deshaun Watson Houston thing just got rough. And so I don't necessarily subscribe to the idea of a team would not pick a player they like because they've had disagreements with the agent, but I'll throw it in the mix. I'll just throw it in the mix. So I have a hard time maybe with the idea of Houston picking CJ, but for instance, Peter Schrager from the NFL Network, he just dropped the mock draft. He has CJ going 2 with the Colts trading up to get him, trading to 2. Because I do think, because here's the thing that's going to happen. I have him also 4 to Indianapolis, Stephen. So the 2nd pick is Houston. The 3rd pick is Arizona. They're not taking a quarterback. The 4th pick is Indianapolis. The 5th pick is Seattle. I think Seattle's going to take a quarterback because the way Pete Carroll and John Schneider talked at the NFL Combine, they're up there because that's Denver's pick. They're not that bad. They are not going to be up there again. This is their chance to get a quarterback in the future because Geno Smith, as good as he was last year, is not their long-term answer at quarterback. I think Seattle's going to take a quarterback. And if they think they can jump to 2 to get CJ, if they think they have to jump the Colts to do that, I think Colts 4, Seattle 5 might all of a sudden have a little competition. If Houston's not taking a quarterback at 2, Arizona's not taking a quarterback at 3, I think both those spots might be up for sale. And Indy and Seattle might be fighting to get the guy they want. I think Anthony Richardson's going to go in the top 5 because I think, for instance, if CJ's gone, I think Seattle will take Anthony Richardson at 5. And I don't think Anthony Richardson's going ahead of CJ. I don't. I think CJ is too much of a sure thing. And the way Todd McShay of ESPN has said is that Bryce Young is the better player. He's the better pick. CJ is the safer pick. And I do think, Nathan, there is some of that within this CJ discussion. I have a very hard time envisioning CJ not succeeding to some level. Now, I also don't think CJ is going to be one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the NFL. I don't. And Bryce is spectacular in his calm and his poise and his ability to move within the pocket. Bryce is outstanding, but he's little, man. He's just little. But I think if you're going to be little, you better be smart, poised, and athletic. I don't think you can only be athletic. Kyler Murray is scaring some people off, and then Baker Mayfield scares some people off. Because in the end, I was in on Baker Mayfield as the number 1 pick. You can't be that short and not athletic, right? That's a bad combo. Right. Now, if you're going to be short, you better be able to scoot. Kyler can scoot, but I don't know. Like, that's a lot of money Arizona invested in Kyler. Kyler's fine. I don't know if Kyler's going to get them over the top. But I would take Bryce Young ahead of Kyler Murray because I just think Bryce has more poise. I think Bryce has a better package of skills. But I could also understand. I just think sometimes, Nathan, there's upside, and then there's like you can't miss. You can't miss. And part of me thinks like Carolina can't miss. They can't trade up from 9 to 1 and miss. So then it's like, well, I think CJ's floor is very high. So that's why I kind of like that to begin with. It's like if you're scared off a little bit by Bryce's size, here's this other guy. Bryce is smart, CJ's smart. Bryce is poised, CJ's poised. Bryce is more mobile, but CJ's bigger. So where are you landing? That's why I thought Carolina and CJ were a good match. But I just think maybe DeMeco Ryans as a defensive coach, I've just said this from the start, I always just think defensive coaches want the guys who can kill you with broken plays, because defensive coaches think I can scheme up and stop a quarterback. But once the play breaks down, there's no defense for that. So I don't know that DeMeco Ryans would be like, well, give me a pocket passer. DeMeco Ryans wants like a little more to it. That's I'm putting that on a defensive coach, fairly or not. So I still like the idea of CJ to Carolina, but it feels like they're going to lean Bryce. Then I don't like the idea of CJ to Houston, but I then do like the idea of CJ to Indianapolis. I think it's a fit. It's an offensive head coach they just hired. And I do like the idea of CJ to Seattle because I think Seattle wants to take a quarterback. So in the end, I don't think he falls out of the top 5. I cannot envision a Justin scenario because I think there are too many quarterback-needy teams that even if somehow he's the third quarterback off the board behind Richardson or Levis, I still think he'd go in the top 5, Nathan.
Yeah, I guess the way I looked at it from Houston's perspective, I think they're in a position where they can't miss either, though. You can't like when you're perpetually drafting at the top. And they haven't used a really high pick on a quarterback since Watson, which isn't that long ago. But Davis Mills was a 3rd-round pick, I believe. Mm-hmm. So you assume they're not going to be that good again, but you could also be a 6-11 team. And I know they have the extra pick next year, but maybe you're not in position because somebody who genuinely stunk doesn't want to trade out of being up at the top of the draft next year. So I think that's part of it, that I think if you see someone who can really help stabilize your franchise, who has a very high floor and can be even if he isn't Deshaun Watson, can be someone who helps give your franchise some stability at the most important position and that high floor of production for the next decade, I think that's hard to turn down. And I also think there is a bit of a weird thing here with the Colts. Like people I talked to at Ohio State's Pro Day who cover the Colts said that there definitely is some divisional animosity is not the right word, but divisional rivalry as far as those draft picks go, and that they were very skeptical that the Texans would trade out of to the Colts. I would see that being much more likely that they would trade it out to the Seahawks. So if you pass on Stroud, if you pass on all quarterbacks at 2, let's say the Texans decide that they want to take Will Anderson, which in a vacuum, maybe that's the right choice. I mean, maybe he's the generational talent they need to take. It might be. Then you are then in effect though probably giving the Colts their choice of the next quarterback that comes off the board. So there's some of that's playing around out there too. To me, it's more like, as I was saying before the draft, like what would you do as opposed to what you think will happen? This is maybe one of the ones where I leaned a little bit more towards what I would do. Like if I was the Texans and I saw this opportunity, knowing that there are no sure things, even in the guys that are coming next year, I think that is a hard thing to turn
Caleb
down.
Williams is a sure thing. Don't say there's no sure things. You might not get him. Caleb Williams is a sure thing.
He's a more sure thing than CJ Stroud.
Caleb Williams would be the first pick in this draft, no doubt about it.
Well, right,
in the next.
I don't think I'm not convinced that he's a better football player than CJ Stroud long term.
He is the most likely sure thing of all the he is the most likely sure thing of the quarterbacks between this draft and next draft. I base my pick off of what I think might happen, but also what I would do if I was the Houston Texans. Defensive head coach in year 1, where unless he goes like 0-17, they're probably not going to fire him. So I'd be building up this defense. So then I can try to cash in and go get Caleb Williams, but I've already got a defense that can carry us while he's young and figuring it out. That's how I looked at the Houston Texans. While also, you kind of brought it up with the Deshaun Watson thing, but that goes vice versa too, right? Who says David Muyagelo wants to deal with Houston Texans again with another high-profile quarterback situation? That goes both ways. But then the Seahawks thing is interesting to me because I don't think they would pick CJ. And the reason why is I think they would take Anthony Richardson because no, Geno Smith is not the long-term answer, but he's your 3-year, $75 million answer. So you've kind of got a guy in place for the next 3 years. So you can kind of swing for the fences with him a little bit and just sit him until he's ready. Because you at least know Geno Smith is good enough to win you 8, 9, 10 games while the guy that you really like is developing in the background. I think that makes sense for them to swing for the high ceiling, but also might be a bust guy. So the only way I see CJ falling past 5 is if the Colts don't take him. Because maybe they just get so sold on Levis, and then all of a sudden now CJ's in a free fall game.
Yeah, and then you're waiting for someone to go get him, and when do they go get him?
Right.
The Browns went Myles Garrett and then Baker Mayfield the next year. Like, they waited, right? When you're in a total rebuild, it's like, like I always said, do you think a team's going to get to the end of a rebuild and not have a quarterback? When people were like, what are the Browns going to do? It's like, they're going to take one. But it's going to be the last piece, Stephen, like you're saying. We're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to build up. And the last piece, because sometimes when you're terrible, you want to drop the quarterback in last because you want to win in the 5-year rookie contract window.
Yep.
So you don't maybe want to take a quarterback and be like, well, we're still going to suck for 3 years until we're ready to be good with you. Like the Bears and Justin Fields, frankly, right? So I could see Houston just not going there. But, Nathan, Dane Brugler from The Athletic has C.J. Stroud going number 2 to Houston. Mel Kiper and Todd McShay did a back-and-forth draft. They picked C.J. Stroud number 2 to Houston, right? There are definitely people who see this. So I think in the end, you have him to Houston at 2. Steven and I have him at 4 to Indianapolis. None of us think he's going to go number 1. I think there are a group of teams that we can see make sense for C.J. Stroud. I think he will wind up with one of them. And I just don't think a slide to 10 or below like Justin, I just don't think it's going to happen. I will be even more shocked. Will I be more shocked? I was pretty shocked. When Atlanta, when that year Denver at 9, Denver was like, we don't have a quarterback. Let's take a corner. I don't know, Justin Fields. And then they wind up trading a gazillion first-round picks for washed Russell Wilson. It's like, what are you doing? Justin Fields is bigger Russell Wilson. He was right there, and you took a corner. Now Patrick Surtain's really good. So I don't know. Carolina could have had a quarterback then. Instead, they muck around for 2 years with Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield and nobody. And now here they are having to trade up from 9 to 1 to take a quarterback because they didn't take Justin Fields when he was sitting there at 8. So maybe I won't be more surprised than I was, Nathan, but I was very, very surprised when Justin Fields lasted till 11 then. And I will be very, very surprised if C.J. Stroud lasts a long time in this draft.
Yeah, me too. And I think you bring up the fact that they are being evaluated in opposite ways. And I know that the think in the NFL changes sometimes somewhat rapidly, but only 2 years ago, I think that the things that people questioned about Justin, some of them have frankly come to fruition. Like, he still has to come around as an NFL passer. His athleticism is there. He's still got to refine his skills as a passer. But CJ is starting with a much higher baseline in that regard in some ways. So I think that their teams are just going to see the value in it. Again, if you start comping him out and you start draft people that we've talked to face and other ones out there. I mean, the names that keep coming up, Ryan Tannehill, Matt Ryan, names of guys who could, if he gets to 80-90% of those, you're like an occasional Pro Bowl quarterback who is a starter for a long time, and you can build around those guys and get into the playoff, and as Matt Ryan showed, almost win a Super Bowl. Almost.
Nathan Baird, C.J. Stroud, number 2 to Houston. Stephen Means and I, C.J. Stroud, number 4 to Indianapolis. So we won't spend that much time on everybody, but this is super interesting. I don't know if we're going to know before the first pick is announced. Will Carolina say no, everybody knows, but it's kind of exciting when there's still a smidge of possibility. And then if CJ doesn't go 1 and he doesn't go 2, then it's on. Then we're in what's going to happen mode. And I think anything could happen. And then I think you have to look at that Arizona spot at 3.
Yeah.
Would they trade out of there and get a ransom from somebody coming up there to get ahead of the Colts at 4 and the Seahawks at 5? And that's where you get interesting.
Because every mock, I was going to ask you guys, because pretty much every mock has the Cardinals taking, if they stay at 3, taking one of 2 people. It's either Anderson if he falls, if 2 quarterbacks go, or it's Tyree Wilson, the defensive end from Texas Tech. But do you guys think that Stroud would fall all the way to 4, or would someone get him at 3 if the Texans pass on him? I think it's very possible.
I think you could look at other teams needing quarterbacks. Would Detroit go from 6, right? Detroit has 2 first-round picks. Would Detroit go from 6 to get him? Would Tennessee at 11 and a former Buckeye as the head coach try to go get him? Like Tannehill comparison, Mike Vrabel knows what it's like to coach Ryan Tannehill, right? Like that, I think you open some doors there on that possibility. And Tennessee's a good football team, and they won a lot of games with Ryan Tannehill, and they're a little bit of a mess at quarterback right now. And if Mike Vrabel's like, solve this, and I think Mike Vrabel, they fired their GM. Mike Vrabel has a lot of power right there. Mike Vrabel knows Ryan Day. Mike Vrabel would have as good of a read on CJ Stroud as anybody in the draft. If Mike Vrabel says, let's do this, I want to lock this down for the rest of my career as the Titans head coach. I believe in this guy. Let's do this. I can see the Titans going up to get him at 3 if he's there. So we'll keep that in mind. If he doesn't go 1 and he doesn't go 2, watch for potential fireworks for CJ Stroud. All right. Those were our picks for that when we come back. Paris Johnson, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, Zach Harrison, Dawand Jones, Luke Wypler, all these guys next on Buckeye Talk. All right, Doug Lesmerises, Nathan Baird, Stephen Means. Lot popping. Good time to be a texter. 614-350-3315. You send a text to that number, you get a link back. Or I was corresponding with somebody on Twitter recently who was having trouble with that they said, I tried to send a text from my phone and I never got back the link. And that's very frustrating. And this person hung in with us and I helped them get signed up for the text. And I'm very grateful that they hung in with us. If you are ever having that trouble, you can also go to joinsubtext.com, joinsubtext.com/Buckeye Talk. Joinsubtext.com/Buckeye Talk. And it's the same thing, but you put your phone number in there and it goes. And if you're having trouble doing it from your phone, that's another way to do it. And I never talk about that on the podcast. And I just ran into a person who was having trouble. Thanks for sticking through the logistics. Let's do Paris Johnson. Now, this is not a sure thing. We'll have to see. Paris Johnson could be the second Buckeye off the board. Jaxon Smith-Njigba could be the second Buckeye off the board. I actually think that'll be a little bit interesting to watch. But let's figure this out. Let's start with Paris Johnson. And let's start with the Raiders at 7. I just don't think Paris Johnson's going to go in the top 6. Peter Skoronski from Northwestern is in a little bit of a head-to-head with Paris Johnson here to be the first tackle off the board. So I also think they both could go in the top 10. So there's plenty of room for everybody. People love tackles. Let's try this with the Raiders at 7. Here we go. Raiders at 7. Number 8, Atlanta. Number 9, Chicago. And I'll take him. I was letting Nathan do it as a Bears fan if he wanted to do it. But I will take Paris Johnson here. And I do think this is a discussion. I don't think it's a slam dunk. On Mock Draft Database, this is the pick. They like, do consensus mock drafts. They grab every single mock draft in the world and put it in here. Their consensus mock draft has a 38% chance of Paris Johnson going number 9 to the Bears. That's what they have. They have Paris Johnson, number 9 to the Bears as this pick. Peter Skoronski from Northwestern could also be the pick at number 9 to the Bears. They also might not take a tackle. And Paris, they are not the unanimous top 2. Daniel Jeremiah has Peter Skoronski has his number 8 player. He has Paris as his number 16 player, but he has Darnell Wright from Tennessee as his number 15 player, as another offensive tackle. So he has Paris as the 3rd offensive tackle. Todd McShay and Mel Kiper in their draft, they took Skoronski at 9 to the Bears. Mm-hmm. Then they took Broderick Jones out of Georgia, 13th to the Jets, and then they took Paris, 14th to New England. Dane Brugler from The Athletic has Paris 13th to the Jets. Peter Schrager from the NFL Network has Paris 17th to the Steelers. So I think 9 would be, this is high, but this is where tackles go. So I'm comfortable with this. This is actually what I think is going to happen, and I think it is a good pick for the Bears. So to me, this is what I think and what I think will happen. I just think Paris has more of an upside than Skoronski. And I don't even want to say that Skoronski has a higher floor. I don't think Paris Johnson's going to miss. He's too talented. He's too smart. He works too hard. He's too much of a good guy. Paris Johnson's a guy you want in your locker room, and also he has every single trait you want in a tackle, I think. So I like Paris here at number 9. Nathan, you did not pull the trigger here at 9 to the Bears. Why?
Because I would right now, as I'm sitting here today, I think they might take Skoronski, and I'll have Paris in a minute. But I hear everything you're saying. The one thing I would remember on Skoronski is it's actually not even people aren't even sold for sure that he'll be a tackle. But it's why I think the Bears, if they were evaluating it and they thought that Peter Skoronski was just the better overall player, the higher ceiling as a football player, the higher ceiling as an offensive lineman in general, I think they might take him because they just have so many needs that they can't be that singularly picky. If it turns out that he just ends up being an all-pro guard, the Bears can't pass that up. And I'm not saying that I don't think that is a potential for Paris Johnson. I'm just trying to explain the thinking that the Bears might be coming with as they look at this pick.
So where do you have Paris? Where would you have taken Paris, Nathan?
This is like the one thing that I got a little weird with, because then I started thinking like, well, if he does move past 9, what team out there might see such value in him? And as we've talked about before, like the best tackles just don't slide out of the top 10, really. So I have New England, which I think picks 14, trading up to take him at 10.
Oh, I like it. Okay. Stephen Means, where do you have Paris going?
13th to the Jets. And I actually thought about him at 11th to the Titans just because, they just got rid of Taylor Lewan, so they need a tackle. But the Jets are kind of in a similar situation where Mekhi Becton's had some injuries, so I'm not completely sold on the idea that they're sold on him as their future left tackle. And I didn't want to put him with Chicago. I agree with Nathan. Skoronski might not be a tackle. And the Bears just need everything. And Paris can play guard, as we saw in 2021. Skoronski might just be a guard. So that I think that might be where the difference is there. But the Jets and the Titans might just need left tackles. And if I'm not sold that the Titans take him, because I think Paris could end up being the third guy off the board, because there's some other tackles who are starting to rise, like you mentioned, Dawand Jones, who I thought the Georgia in the Peach Bowl had a really good game that game. But I think that if he gets to the Jets at 13, they'll take him as, I don't want to say insurance policy for Mekhi Becton, but then you could probably move Becton back to right tackle and Parrish is your left tackle going forward.
I also want to say, I think the team that should take him, but I don't think it'll happen because of just this team's history and the way that they do things in the draft, is the team you started this countdown with. I think maybe the Raiders. If somebody was going to take a leap on someone like this, I mean, they should be taking Skoronski or Johnson at 7, I think. Unless a quarterback is there that they can't turn down. That's, I think, what I would do if I were them.
Yeah, but that's not the Raiders' way. They take the picks that don't make any sense.
So tackles go in the top 10. Guards do not. The only guard to go in the top 10 in the last 7 years is Quentin Nelson with the Colts, who people think is like the greatest guard in the history of football. Mm-hmm. And so I just think if you are taking a guy like that, to me is a discussion. If you're like, well, we like this guy, but we think he's a guard. It's like, well, then I don't think you should take a guard at 9. I think you should take a left tackle who's going to protect Justin Fields for the next 10 years. So that leans me to Paris, that we think they're both good. Maybe you think Skoronski's floor is higher because he's a sure thing, and if his arms are too short to play tackle, he's going to be a great guard. Well, take a great guard in the second round. Like, I don't know that you get to the Super Bowl. Like, the Colts have Quentin Nelson. They suck. It's always one of those things. It's like, it's not pick. Well, it's not pick. No, but the name of the game, even the name of the game is not pick Pro Bowl players. The name of the game is pick players that will have the greatest impact on your team winning. And left tackles influence that more than guards because you can find guards. Can't find tackles. So I don't disagree with what you guys are saying, and I don't disagree with the idea that Skoronski might go higher than Paris. But to me, if I'm making that pick, if I have any doubts about Skoronski as a tackle, it doesn't mean I'm not drafting him. I'm just not drafting him ahead of Paris Johnson.
Like, no, I get it. Like, if you're the Bears, though, if you're the Bears at 9, here's the thing I actually think. If you're the Bears at 9 and on the table you still have Skoronski, all the other tackles, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, who else can we name in here? I guess Jalen Carter. Like, there's going to be like 6 or 7 guys who you completely would take at 9. I think the Bears should probably trade down again.
I agree.
Because I don't know that any of those guys are so worth using that pick on, that if someone is going to reward you to trade up 5 or 6 spots,
Yeah.
and you can still get someone who you would have taken at 9 because they just have so many needs. There's not one need that the Bears have that supersedes all the others, especially after they got DJ Moore in that trade. So I think if I was the Bears, and God, I wish I were sometimes. If I was the Bears, I think I would be trading out a 9, depending on who's there.
This always happens. It depends how many quarterbacks go high, because like the Bears traded out of 1 because they aren't taking a quarterback. So all of a sudden, if 4 quarterbacks go before the Bears pick at 9, a lot of good players are dropping down to you. And all of a sudden you have some maneuverability there. Or if the top 4 quarterbacks don't go before 9 and there's one more team who wants a quarterback, maybe you can ransom the pick for a team that wants to come to 9 and take the 4th quarterback, whether it's Levis or Richardson or, God forbid, CJ Stroud. So I do think there's some opportunity there to what you're saying. But also, again, Steven, good. The first tackle is almost always off the board in the top 10. So I think for anybody who is projecting Paris not in the top 10, right? I think that has to mean you think a different tackle has gone. So like you have Paris at 13 to the Jets, Steven. I think that has to mean you think Skoronski or Broderick Jones or Darnell Wright. Just there's a team that wanted to tackle just like this guy a little bit better than Paris.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, sometimes there's multiple tackles in the top 10. It's just how it shook out this year. The teams who don't need quarterbacks also don't need tackles, or they're the Raiders for the most part. So you're probably only going to see one in the top 10. Yes, my entire logic was I'm not completely confident Paris is going to be the first tackle taken. So if that's not the case, that's how he falls out the top 10. But I do agree the Bears probably need to maximize these picks a little bit more. Because the best thing I think that could happen for the Bears is 3 of the quarterbacks go in the top 5.
Maybe. I mean, if you're a team that you think you already have your quarterback and everybody else is kind of mushed together, it's like a big group of guys and you can take anybody in there. Like, I just think we'll see what the value is. I just think there could be real value there to trade out a 9.
But if 3 of the top 4 are gone, you can probably swindle and get a little bit more than you should, just because the value on who number 4 is goes up, because now someone's desperate when they didn't think they'd be desperate when they were picking 14th.
So when you look at what people are projecting, right, I mean, it's just there's no, like Paris is going on the top 20. I think that's a sure thing. So if you think he gets into the teens, I think that's very reasonable. I don't think he gets out of the teens if that happens. So in conclusion, Paris Johnson, number 9 for me to the Bears, number 10 for Nathan to New England in a trade, and number 13 to the Jets for Steven, which will bring us to Jaxon Smith-Njigba. And again, like there's the Bears at 9. You're talking about all the guys, and you mentioned it. Paris might be on the board there, and Jaxon Smith-Njigba might be on the board there, and they both would be interesting pairings with Justin Fields in Chicago. Let's start Jaxon Smith-Njigba here. Let's start it at 7 again, just in case. Where do we think Jaxon Smith-Njigba is going to go? 7 to the Las Vegas Raiders, 8 to Atlanta, 9 to the Bears, 10 to the Eagles, 11 to the Tennessee Titans.
Ding.
I'm going to ding this too. Can you explain why you like Jaxon Smith-Njigba at 11, Nathan?
So I think of the Titans as being a somewhat conservative franchise in general. I don't know why I think that. Maybe because they never have like electric wide receivers and they have Ryan Tannehill at quarterback. Like maybe that's part of it, and that they just let Derrick Henry run for 5,000 yards a year. I think in a perfect world, maybe they would be a team that is looking to trade up if they identify someone that is their quarterback that they have to go get to succeed Tannehill, or if they see in one of these offensive tackles something nobody else does and they feel like it's worth trading up, I could totally see that. But if they're still sitting here at 11 and it's played out the other ways that we predict it is played out, then I think they might look at this and say this is too much value to turn down. And it's not like they don't need a receiver. You know, it's why am I blanking on the name right now? But the guy that they traded to AJ Brown, when they traded AJ Brown, that was Mike Vrabel was not a fan of that move, I think, from the moment that it happened at the draft or prior to the draft, whenever it was. And I think they also lost, I think, Robert Woods in free agency just as a backup guy. But I mean, I don't think they added anybody in free agency. It didn't look like this time around. They need a playmaker. They need something to kind of rejuvenate what they have off of Henry, someone who can help maybe Tannehill maximize, or whoever the quarterback is, maximize what they have here in the coming years. I think it's just a really smart fit for them, that they're getting a lot of bang for their buck. This tends to happen, I think, sometimes with organizations and staffs that are sort of considered among the best. This would be like a thing that would happen for like the Patriots or the Ravens, teams that I think just kind of have their stuff together. Like, stuff just sort of falls to them sometimes. They don't overreach, and the right guy just kind of settles in there, and it's tough to turn down. And I think if Jaxon Smith-Njigba had played this past year, I don't know. He's already considered by many the number one guy in this class. He's falling this far because of some of the stuff he went through, obviously. But I think it's just too much to turn down, to get a guy who a year ago people thought would have been a potential first-round pick, and you're getting him here.
So when the Titans traded A.J. Brown to Philadelphia, they got a first-round pick back. They drafted Treylon Burks from Arkansas, who was just sort of okay. He had 33 catches on 54 targets last year for 444 yards in 11 games. I think I don't know that he's number one. If you bring in Jaxon, now you pair those guys together. Now you start thinking about your quarterback future, and you're kind of building up a little bit. I think you bring something out of Treylon Burks by adding somebody like Jaxon Smith-Njigba. So all of a sudden, right, the coverage doesn't have to lean to Treylon Burks. You're trying to go after Jaxon Smith-Njigba. So we both have him 11 to Tennessee. Steven, where do you have Jaxon going?
12 to Houston.
So we have to talk about this. You do not have CJ to Houston.
I don't.
But do you think the magic combo of CJ and Jaxon at 2 and 12 to Houston, A, is possible, B, would be cool?
Yes, and yes to the second part. I mean, I only spent 6 months obsessing over it, right? No big deal, though. But I think if some of these other variables didn't exist, that's where my head would be at. Oh, they're taking CJ, they're taking Jaxon. Because we've seen that in the NFL now, where you get the quarterback and then you go get the receiver he played with and all the awesome stuff they did in college. They're not going to do in the NFL, whether it's Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase being the craziest version of that, or even with Jalen Hurts and Devontae Smith. I mean, they played together in Alabama, so we've seen this happen before. So logically, why would Houston not want to do that again? All the other outside variables are why I shied away from it. But so I still think Houston takes Jaxon, and he just has like the Garrett Wilson year, where at the end of the year we're going, I cannot believe you were this good, and that was your quarterback situation. Kudos to you, my guy, but your quarterback is on the way this offseason.
And Jackson's also from Texas. So you're bringing that guy home. I think CJ has a very high floor. I've stated this before. I just think CJ is like a nice, normal guy who hears the noise. I think you get a better CJ Stroud if you bring Jaxon Smith-Njigba along for the ride. I think they bring out the best in each other. That doesn't mean that's not even on the field. They can live together. Like, it's your guy. You're entering this world, and you're doing it together. You're getting to do the thing you did not get to do in your final year. Part of the reason CJ's here is because Jaxon Smith-Njigba was committed to Ohio State. I think this scenario, now you can't guarantee it, but I do think if Houston did take CJ at 2, I would extra try to take Jaxon at 12 if he was there. So, not like, Nathan, you have CJ at 2 to Houston, but now you have Jaxon off the board at 11 before Houston has a chance. So none of us have this happening, but I do think there is on the football, I like it. On the beyond the football, I really like it. And I don't think it's a reach either way, Nathan, if it happened. And by the way, I think, man, New Orleans has had a bunch of Buckeyes. The Bengals have had a bunch of Buckeyes. Man, you'd have a lot of Ohio State people all of a sudden very interested in the Houston Texans if this happened, Nathan. I kind of, as much as I sort of doubt CJ to Houston, I also kind of want this to happen.
I think it would be fun to watch. Has there really never been a comparable situation in Ohio State history, right? Like, partially because they don't necessarily send a lot of first-round quarterbacks until the last few years. Probably the closest thing
we thought we were going to have it with,
right?
with yes,
Terry and
exactly.
Dwayne. Yeah. But also Terry wasn't the first rounder, so like the ceiling maybe wasn't as high had to get to that situation.
Although that has not turned out. I mean, obviously the ceiling has been higher than
Yeah,
people maybe
it's flipped.
expected with him. And it unfortunately didn't come with Dwayne's influence necessarily. So I think it would be a lot of fun to watch. And listen, like Ohio State, the last 2 years with C.J. Stroud as quarterback, has led the nation in yards per play as an offense, and it's been largely because of what C.J. Stroud is and does as a quarterback with that receiving core. So you've got a guy who knows how to maximize, relative to his talent, maximize an NFL receiving core. Like, I think that was the other thing I was thinking about at number 2. It's like he gets dinged so often, and Justin Fields got dinged for like these guys around him. But like, I would look at it and say, this guy might know how to do this, how to move the ball around, how to spread the ball around, how to keep every mouth fed and maximize things like. And you saw what he did with Jackson. The connection there was legitimate. So I also agree. If I didn't talk myself into the Titans making what I think is a pretty shrewd decision at 11, I think the Texans would take him at 12.
I think it's also pretty efficient because it's not just, he knows how to work with guys. It's what do you do when you think you finally hit on a quarterback? You put a bunch of weapons around him and see if the team elevates and you finally start winning some games. Well, if you got two of those guys on the same timeline because they're growing up together, literally in this, because you drafted them the same year, that probably speeds up the timeline and also takes off you having to maybe overpay somebody else because you have your number one receiver and you have your quarterback. And now can you just go find your number 2, maybe a slot guard, maybe a tight end to finish up that passing attack?
You look at last year, Drake London, first receiver off the board at 8. Then we had the run Garrett Wilson at 10, Chris Olave at 11, and former Buckeye Jamison Williams at 12 to Detroit. I do think Jackson will be the first receiver taken. Steven, when you have Jackson here at 12, do you believe he's the first receiver taken?
Yeah, I think he might even be the first receiver taken in the top 20. This is not the most impressive receiving class, especially in comparison to what we've seen the last couple of years here. So it's if Jackson isn't going in the top 20, I don't think there will be a receiver in the top 20.
Nathan, what about you?
Yeah, he'll be the first receiver taken.
Okay. The mock draft database has Jaxon Smith-Njigba 12 to Houston. Dane Brugler has him 20 to Seattle, but as the first receiver taken. What you're saying, Steven, maybe no receiver goes in higher than that. Daniel Jeremiah from the NFL Network on his big board does have Jordan Addison from USC ranked higher than Jackson. He has Addison as a 13th player. He has Jackson as the 19th player. I just think the measurables, the size, Jackson's bigger, thicker, I think a better route runner and faster. So like I would be curious to hear the explanation. Like last year, I liked Drake London. I still think I would have taken Garrett first among the receivers, but Drake London's a big receiver. Garrett's not that big. Okay, you understand how a team gets to that. Quentin Johnston at one time from TCU was in this discussion as first receiver off the board. He seems to not be in that discussion anymore. I think Jackson and Jordan are kind of the same guy, and I don't know what would lead you to Jordan instead of Jackson. So I will be a little bit surprised if Jordan Addison goes ahead of him. The Mel Kiper, Todd McShay mock draft at ESPN.com, they have him 12 to Houston. And Todd McShay just was making the even-numbered picks in that draft. He made the magic happen. Todd McShay took CJ at 2 and Jackson at 12 and made that pairing. Peter Schrager from the NFL Network, Green Bay at 15. So that's one of those things like, hey, welcome to Green Bay. This is Jordan Love. You're supposed to make him good. Good luck. So we'll see how that happens. It's not like one of those where you get to go play with Aaron Rodgers. So, okay, that is very similar to us. Nathan and I have Jackson 11 to Tennessee. Steven has him 12 to Houston. The next guys, we're going to get faster. We have 4 or 5 more guys that we want to do, but these are the big names. I mean, we're talking about this. I have 3 Buckeyes in the top 11. Nathan has 3 Buckeyes in the top 11. Steven has 3 Buckeyes in the top 13. Like, this is a great draft for Ohio State. Like, these are elite dudes at elite positions, but there still might be one more first rounder. We'll see. We'll do that next on Buckeye Talk. All right, Dawand Jones is the other guy who is a possibility. When you go to the mock draft database, you will find people predicting Dawand Jones to be a first rounder. There are people still doing that. And the highest that I think you find there is Pittsburgh at 17. So that's where we will start this. And I'll go a little quicker because he's not a slam dunk first round choice. So we'll start with the Pittsburgh Steelers at 17. Where do we think Dawand Jones will go? Here we go. Pittsburgh at 17, 18 Detroit, 19 Tampa, 20 Seattle, 21 the Chargers, 22 Baltimore, 23 Minnesota, 24 Jacksonville, 25 the Giants, 26 Dallas, 27 Buffalo, 28 the Bengals. And I'll ding it.
Mm-hmm. I know you're going to do
I made my bet. I'm not backing off my bet. I made my bet. I think I told you guys at Pro Day, I said to Dawand, I think you're going 20. I think you're going to the Bengals. He said, I kind of think that too. I don't know what that means. Now, we had James Palmer from the NFL Network on, who knows much more about the NFL than any of the three of us. And he did say he thought some NFL teams didn't love that Dawand kind of passed on Ohio State's Pro Day. So I don't know. He was so hot after one day at the Senior Bowl, Stephen. He had a great day at the Senior Bowl. Then something happened. We think he got hurt. Kind of didn't do anything else at the Senior Bowl. And I think like his peak in draft chatter was then.
Too early.
And it's not that he's falling, but the chatter just isn't quite as strong. So where did you have Dawand going, and how much did you consider him as a first rounder, Stephen?
The Bengals were the only place I thought of when it came to the first round because they just might need an offensive tackle. I just wasn't sold that was the best bang for the buck in that position. I think he peaked too early with his draft buzz. If the draft would have been March 27th instead of April 27th, then I think it would have been in his favor. But we're too far away from his best moments. And I think I don't want to say he's falling, but he's returning to the mean a little bit. So I had him at 41 to the Titans, which makes Tennessee feel a little bit better about not taking Paris in the first round. They already got Nicholas Petit-Frere, who I think won a job and can play left tackle for you. So maybe that was kind of the plan here is you don't want to pay Taylor Lewan again. So spend Nicholas Petit-Frere playing right tackle for a year, move him over to left tackle. And then you got an Ohio State tackle down there in Tennessee, which, I think their head coach would like that a little bit for reasons I think we all know.
No, I think we do that most years. You wind up finding teams with some connections, teams that have a history of liking Buckeyes, teams that have people with Ohio State connections, but also like there's truth to that. There was a time when Dick LeBeau, a former Ohio State Buckeye, was in Pittsburgh, and they wound up taking a lot of Buckeyes as Steelers. And so, we don't want to overdo that, but also that's real, Stephen. I mean, like Mike Vrabel's going to have a handle on this thing. So, and Petit-Frere is already there, and I think that 40 range, right? We're talking about middle of the second round. In the end, is probably more realistic than me grabbing him at 28. Nathan, where do you have him?
So I said before that I thought the Raiders should take a tackle at 7, and I think they won't. I think they would be much more likely to then take a riskier pick, quote unquote riskier pick. So I have the Raiders taking him at number 38. So semi-early in the second round. Right now you're seeing, and you're right, that there was a time when Dawand had really risen up into the bottom of a lot of first rounds. I know there's still some out there, but if you look at like a lot of the main mock drafts that are out there, like guys that we like trust maybe the most, that's not the case anymore. It's really sagging back towards that, what you're talking about right now, right? That 40s range.
Yeah, that seems more like it. The Todd McShay, Mel Kiper mock draft, they have him at 50 to Tampa. That is as the 6th tackle off the board, which is pretty good. That's just not a lot of tackles in the top 50 for that. Daniel Jeremiah on his big board of top 50 players from the NFL Network does not have Dawand on there as a top 50 player. Let's see. Mock Draft Database has him at number 60 to the Bengals, which is this kind of thing happens sometimes. Happened with the Browns a couple years ago when people thought they might take Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah at I think 20th in the first round. They took Greg Newsome instead, and then they took JOK in the second round. So it's like, there's a guy that you feel kind of linked, and all of a sudden you don't take him in the first round, and now here he comes down the board again, and you catch him the second time around. Like 60 to the Bengals is a great pick, I think, for Cincinnati because, tackle is a little bit of a need for them. Jonah Williams, they signed a left tackle. Jonah Williams was a left tackle. They said they're going to move him to right tackle. Jonah Williams said, trade me. Jonah Williams, who was a first-round pick there a couple years ago. So they might really need a right tackle there. Dane Brugler has him 49 to Pittsburgh. Again, Pittsburgh seems interested in tackles here, and I think either Paris in the first round or Dawand in the second round could find their way to the Steelers. And I will say on the mock draft database, the other team that is popular for him in the first round, Cincinnati at 28 is one of them. The other one is the freaking Chiefs, Steven.
Mm-hmm.
Like, can you imagine? It's like, and here we go. Congratulations, Dawand. Go to the best franchise in the NFL, because I don't know exactly what's up with the Chiefs, but there are a lot of people who see that match for him there. What a heck of a thing that would be.
I think some of that just might be an ode that Patrick Mahomes is a magician and can twirl around and throw the ball regardless of if his feet are set or not, and can do whatever. But I can see it. I can see that. 2-time Super Bowl champ Dawand Jones by the end of his career, just because he spent his entire career in Kansas City. I can see it. It would actually make sense for where the Chiefs are at this point, right? When you're winning Super Bowls like that, you can maybe take a little bit more chances when you're always going to be drafting between 28 and 32, basically, for the next decade.
Yeah, I want that to happen just to see if he can bankrupt the Jack Stacks on his own. I think it could happen.
What's a Jack Stack? What's a Jack Stack?
It's one of the famous barbecue restaurants there in Kansas City.
Oh, that'd be lovely. No, that'd be good for him. I think he likes barbecue. So I do think somebody at PFF, I saw a tweet that said, if you have a mobile quarterback, Dawand Jones is a great pick for you at right tackle. And I'm not sure exactly what that meant. I think what that meant is he will maul people in the run game, and every now and then he might give up a little bit in the pass game. But if your quarterback can get away from it, then take the mauler in the run game, who's not terrible in pass protection, but pretty good. You guys are both nodding.
Yep.
You think that's what that means?
I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
I think that's very on brand because, CJ wasn't mobile, but there were times when, like, Dawand gets beat, it's really noticeable and ugly.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when he mauls people, he mauls people.
It's also noticeable and ugly.
It is because there's a flat person. It's like a flat Stanley situation. The Bengals just draft a lot of Buckeyes, and it has been a little bit odd. Isaiah Prince made his way through there as an offensive lineman. Billy Price made his way through there as an offensive lineman. Michael Jordan made his way through there as an offensive lineman. Also, none of it great. So, not that really matters, but, the Bengals had a lot of success with Sam Hubbard. They've had a lot of success. Von Bell is now gone, but Von Bell's time in Cincinnati was very, very good. They've had success with Eli Apple coming through as, I think his third franchise. The Buckeyes on the offensive line in Cincinnati have not necessarily been great. So keep that in mind. I have Dawand Jones 28 to the Bengals, Nathan 38 to Vegas, Steven 41 to Tennessee. All gone by the middle of the second round, which is a great outcome for a guy who was ranked in the thousands as a recruit. So Dawand Jones is a success story, however this unfolds, whether it's going to be in the first round or what we all think, certainly no lower than the second round, which brings us to Zach Harrison. I don't want to give anything away necessarily, but can I ask, does anybody have Zach Harrison going in the second round? Steven, do you have Zach in the second round?
I don't.
Nathan, do you have Zach in the second round?
I don't.
Okay, so then I won't start our countdown in the second round because that's not great podcasting. We'll start at number 1, Carolina. Will they take Zach Harrison? Carolina, Houston, Arizona. Now we're to pick 100. You're still doing it. So I will start at the beginning of the third round, and I'm going to go hot. So hold on to your pants, Buckeye Talk. We're going to do this quick, and we'll see if we get to a Zach Harrison selection sooner than later. Here we go. First pick in the third round is number 64 to the Chicago Bears. 64 Chicago, 65 Houston, 66 Arizona, 67 Denver, 68 Denver. 69 Rams, 70 Raiders, 71 New Orleans, 72 Tennessee.
Bing.
You're binging at 72 Tennessee,
71.
Nathan, is that correct? No?
71 to
71.
the Saints.
71 to the Saints. Why?
A couple of reasons, and you're almost getting at a stage where number one, the Saints love them some Buckeyes. Saints take Buckeyes, and it's kind of it's been over a couple of regimes now. The Saints also lost multiple edge guys to free agency. They just need to replenish at that position. And I also just think that someone is going to jump on his athletic upside after some of the testing that we saw. The strength that he was putting with his wingspan, I don't know. I haven't heard, obviously, behind the scenes if he was able to actually run a 40 when he got to some of these individual workouts. But Doug, when you and I talked to him in the hall at the combine, he was supremely confident in the number that he would run if given the chance. And now if he hasn't had the chance to run that number, then that obviously affects, he's not going to go this high. But I think if he showed up and ran the number he was talking about, I think this is the range where he would go.
All right, 71 in New Orleans. Steven, where did you have him?
I had him 84 to the Dolphins. I think if he would have ran that number, whatever number he was referring to when he was talking to you guys in Indianapolis, I think he might have snuck in the second round, because you pair that hypothetical number with the other testing he was doing, and then just the eye test with him. And he's been productive. He's not a sack guy. I told him about it. He said, I might be a sack guy in the NFL. I said, okay, we'll see. But he was a sack guy in college. So he's not a sack guy, but I think he's really good at practically everything else that comes with being a defensive end. So that all mixed together seemed like he could have forced himself into the second round, and that hasn't happened. Just when you look at different mock drafts, it doesn't seem like he ever had buzz to really start pushing his way up the draft boards a little bit here. So 84 to the Dolphins, third round pick with the potential that he might end up having a second round player's career, if that makes sense.
I have him 86 to Baltimore. So we're all I think this 70s, 80s range is right. I think it is between the end of the second round. So it's 64 or lower, but I think he's a top 100 player. So somewhere between 64 and 100, which is where all of us are, I think is the right range for him. Dane Brugler has him going 68th to Denver in round 3. That's as the 11th edge guy off the board. Dane, in his rankings at The Athletic, has him as the 13th ranked edge. Mel Kiper and Todd McShay in their draft have him going 88 to Jacksonville. So again, right in this range here. This I can't believe. I cannot believe it. I cannot believe it that this group backed this guy his entire career. They were in lockstep. They loved this guy, and now it's draft time, and they are bailing on him. PFF has Zach Harrison at number 122 on their big board as the number 22 edge. I was going to PFF thinking, like, do they think he's a first rounder? Nobody has loved anyone like PFF has loved Zach Harrison for 3 years. Nathan, what is happening? Now, they're not a monolithic entity. There are different people there, but like, what are you not seeing now that you saw his entire career when you were like, yeah, PFF thinks Zach Harrison's an All-American?
I guess this could be a just a pass rush thing, that they think teams will so emphasize the pass rush at that position that it makes someone who's just more all-around solid less desirable. I don't know. That seems low based on just what we saw relative to other edge guys in the draft process. And the other things, when you start talking about things like, Ohio State, I've talked about this before, like Ohio State's sack rate as a team last year, which then sort of translates down into individual sack rates, not that bad, because they didn't face that many pass attempts. When you start actually lining up the sacks they had against how many opportunities they had to get sacks, it's not as low as it seems when you just look at the pure sheer sack totals. So I don't know. I'm still optimistic that he goes more in the range that we're talking about than falling out of the top 100.
Turncoats, absolute turncoats. I am angry at PFF. Here's their breakdown on Zach Harrison. Harrison is a long, explosive defensive end who is still trying to figure out how to tap into his immense physical gifts. While he earned an 85.2 pass rushing grade this past season, it's worrisome that his grades have plateaued since his 2020 season. You know why his grades have plateaued? Because in 2020, you thought Zach Harrison was the best player in America, PFF. He hasn't plateaued. You overrated him early in his career, and now you're dinging him because it's like, well, we thought he was going to be awesome. 2020, they have his grades listed here. 2020, his overall grade from PFF was an 88.8. That was 10th out of 531 edge rushers they graded in the entire country. 10th best edge rusher in the country as a sophomore. 2021, 81.7 grade, that's 81st among edge guys out of 826. 2022, 86.1 grade, that's 29th among edge rushers out of 862 guys. So PFF is like, how come you're not the 10th best edge rusher in the country anymore? And it's like, because he never was PFF, but he's also shouldn't be in the 120s in your draft rating now. Turncoats!
Chase Young Young's 2018 PFF grade is the same as Zach Harrison's 2020 PFF grade, even though Chase Young got 10.5 sacks on terrible ankles.
They're the same. This is it's not him. It's not Zach PFF. It's you.
Facts.
It's you. It's not him. It's you. I like using Ohio State guys that we know as ranges here, right? And I think we have the four very good range guys here. Tyquan Lewis, 2018 draft. He's the number 64 overall pick, last pick in the second round. Sam Hubbard, 2018 draft, is the number 77 overall pick in the third round. Adolphus Washington, who was really, I guess, more of a tackle than an edge, but I actually kind of think is a decent comparison for Zach. And sometimes when we on here talked about, like, maybe should they try Zach Harrison inside? I think I had Adolphus Washington in my head. It's sort of like a long, physical guy who you're wondering, maybe would the production be even a little higher than this? But they're a good football player. Adolphus Washington, 2016 draft, 80th overall pick in the third round. And then Jalen Holmes in the 2018 draft, an edge who also wound up playing some tackle, the number 102 overall pick in the fourth round. So I think Zach Harrison should go earlier than Jalen Holmes did. I think that. If you said to me, who would you rather draft, Zach Harrison or Adolphus Washington? I would say Zach Harrison. Not like vociferously, I wouldn't bang the table about it, but I just think those two guys coming out of college, I'd take Zach. So that's Adolphus 180. So, okay, we're right in that range. And then Hubbard and Tyquan. Tyquan's more productive, and Sam's just like a different kind of athlete. And Sam, I think, is just... Sam, I had real questions about how good Sam would be. I thought Sam could get caught as a tweener. And it turns out that Sam's like versatility and his flexibility as an edge guy, like the Bengals have maximized that, and he's been awesome for them. He's performed better than a number 77 pick. But I think for us to be in this range, I think we're right. If you could make a bet, will Zach Harrison be picked in the 70s or 80s? I'd make that bet, Nathan. And that's what we have. Nathan Baird, 71 in New Orleans. Stephen Means, 84 to Miami. Me, 86 to Baltimore, Nathan. I think we're going to be pretty close on this.
And listen, the other thing to remember is there have been a handful of guys in recent vintage at Ohio State, be they P. Werner, Baron Browning. I don't know if you'd put Malik Harrison quite by this description or not, but, going in like the late second, third, early fourth rounds, who were guys who didn't have like spectacular All-American careers, but we saw how solid they were, and NFL teams recognized something maybe even a little bit better in that based on where they were. It felt like they were overdrafting them relative to we've talked about this before, relative to their success at Ohio State. And it's paying off for some of those guys right now in the NFL the way they're playing.
Okay, let's move on to Luke Wypler. Luke Wypler, and this will make itself known here in a second. Does anybody have Luke Wypler going in the second round? Nathan, do you have Luke Wypler in the second round? No. Steven, no?
No.
No. Okay. So let's start this then in the third round with the Chicago Bears at pick 64. Chicago at 64. Houston 65. Arizona 66. And I'll ding it here. And the question is, where does Luke Wypler rank among the centers? And now we're coming back around. PFF has Luke Wypler as the number one center. They have Luke Wypler 48 on their big board. Dane Brugler has Luke Wypler going in the fourth round to Chicago at 133 as the fourth center. There are a lot of Big Ten centers in the mix here. There is this John Jacob Jingleheimer Harrison. What's his name? It's some guy from Minnesota. Of course, he has three names. They're all Viking
names. His name is my name, too.
John Michael Schmitz. Yeah. His name is, John Michael Schmitz. So John Michael, for Dane Brugler, he has Joe Tippmann from Wisconsin as the first center. John Michael Schmitz from Minnesota as the second center. Ricky Stromberg from Arkansas as the third. Then Luke Wypler fourth. Juice Scruggs from Penn State sixth. Olu Oluwatimi from Michigan, 7th. Olu Oluwatimi, who was like the heartbeat of a playoff team and won the award for the best center in college football. But that doesn't mean the same thing as a draft prospect. But man, it's always one of these things. It's like, could the Big Ten get a quarterback? It's like, nope. Could the Big Ten have just a ridiculous wealth of centers? Oh, yeah. Center heaven. So there's a bunch of centers, and we don't know. We don't know. Do we know? Is Luke Wypler going to be the first center? Is Luke Wypler? I don't know. But we have some context. Josh Myers, Corey Linsley. I'm trying to find teams that need a center. Feels like Arizona doesn't have a center. They have a guy that they just signed who was like a backup for the Browns, who's listed as their starting center right now. He's not going to be their center. So I'm trying to find, and I think you can draft Luke Wypler to be your starting center, I think. And you can do that like in the 3rd or 4th round. You also could draft him to be your backup center for a year. Like the Packers didn't draft Corey Linsley to be their starting center. They had J.C. Treader. He got hurt. They put Corey Linsley in, and then Corey Linsley was like, hey, I'm the best center in the NFL. So I don't think Luke Wypler is guaranteed to start in the NFL in 2023. I think he could, which is why I have him going this high, because centers kind of sometimes do go that high. Teams will take centers that high. The last draft, so I took Luke Wypler at 66. Last year, there were 3 centers taken before 66. 2021, there were 3 centers taken before 66. 2020, there was 1. 2019, there were 2. 2018, there were 4. 2017, there was 1. But Pat Elflein from Ohio State went at pick number 70 in the 3rd round as a guard/center. I don't think that's a terrible conversation here. So I understand 66 feels high, and I have him going ahead of Zach Harrison. But I'm trying to look at where centers go, and could he be one of the first centers? And I think that led me here. Nathan, where did you have Luke Wypler?
So I also had him going to the Bears in the 4th round, but not with the late round, not the late pick in that round, with the first pick of that round. So 103 overall, they have the first pick of the 4th round. So almost a top 100 player. And I think if you were to assess Luke Wypler's career, was he one of the top 100 players at any point? I think you would say no. I don't think he was one of the top 100 players in college football last year. But I think this makes a lot of sense, slotting in some place like this. I don't know that he has the positionality, the versatility. I think he could play guard, but I don't think teams are looking at him as either. I think he's a center. So then and even if you're the number 1 center in this class, where would you rank in the average class? Like, where would he have been up with the last couple classes where he had Linderbaum and some of those other guys coming out? I don't know if he would have been ranked that high, because some of those guys were going 1st, 2nd round. So I thought this was a pretty soft landing spot for him. And it's an interesting one because, number 1, it's Justin Fields. He'd be Justin Fields as center. And it's a team that needs someone that it can grow with long term. I think it's going to look really smart someday that Luke Wypler came out early. And we were a little bit surprised the night it happened. I know Ohio State was surprised when it happened. But I think it's going to look pretty shrewd. It already kind of is by the impression that he's made on teams. And I also just, again, as someone who grew up following the Bears, I kind of like this attitude fit because he's got one. And even though he's an East Coast, like New York, New Jersey guy, then that's sort of a contrast to Chicago attitude in some ways. I think it could also be a fun mix to watch develop that with that fan base.
Yeah, no, we like giving Buckeyes to the Bears to pair with Justin Fields. Steven, where'd you have him going?
I also have him going above Zach Harrison just because of positional stuff. 80 to the Steelers. Don't necessarily have a long-term answer at center, and I think even if you don't start him right away, this is a guy that might be able to take over in year 2, similar to what we saw with Josh Myers. But yeah, I think he's really good. I also think he just probably picked a really smart time to come out in the NFL draft when he looked at the positional need that that they have this year.
And it is interesting. So Steven and I both have Wypler ahead of Harrison. Nathan has Harrison ahead of Wypler. That was part of it for me is I think Zach, I don't want to say we'll get lost, but like there's a lot of edge guys and then people like this edge guy, well, this guy has better bend and this guy's bigger or this guy has longer arms or this guy's stronger or this would. And then Zach does many things well. And Zach has really good traits and Zach tested well. And Zach has good arm length and Zach has good size. But I don't know if people will feel the need or fall in love, and then there might just be people who we need a center, and it can be dangerous to draft on need. But also, if you feel like we can take a guy in the third or fourth rounds who's going to start for us, that could also be a really good way to approach the draft. So again, looking for comparisons. Nathan, I just would be curious, do you think this sounds about right? We have him at 66, 80, and 103, the three of us. Josh Myers was pick 62. Wyatt Davis was pick 86. And I'm not just talking centers, I'm talking interior offensive linemen for Ohio State. Jonah Jackson was pick 75 and has been great in the NFL. Michael Jordan was pick 136. Pat Elflein was pick 70. And Corey Linsley was pick 171. And that's not counting Billy Price, who was a first rounder as a center and did not work out at all. But we're talking 62, 86, 75, 136, 70, 161. That's four interior guys in Myers, Wyatt Davis, Jonah Jackson, and Pat Elflein, who are in this range, who are top 100 guys. Do you think Luke Wypler belongs in that group?
Yeah. I mean, we're all picking him within that realm. I think he definitely does. But I think that also tells you just how wildly, for this position, it can swing from year to year, depending on who needs one and what else is in that class. That's true of all positions, I guess, to some extent. But center, it seems like maybe especially true. Interior offensive line has always been, I think, one of the harder ones for us to pin down as we're trying to do these predictions.
Yeah. So, but I think third, fourth round. I don't think he'll get to the fifth round. So I think this will be, it'll be interesting to see if he winds up on, the first round is next Thursday. The first round's on Thursday, second and third round on Friday, and then fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh on Saturday. Will Luke Wypler be a day 2 pick? Will be something interesting to follow. All right, let's go to Ronnie Hickman, and I will ask this question: does anybody have Ronnie Hickman in the fourth round?
No.
No? Does anybody have Ronnie Hickman in the fifth round?
I don't.
No?
Nope.
Does anybody have Ronnie Hickman in the sixth round, which would start at pick 178 for the Chiefs?
I do.
I do.
Okay. So now you guys are on the clock to try to do this. We'll run through this quick, starting with the sixth round, 178 to Kansas City. 178 Kansas City, 179 Houston, 180 Arizona, 181 Tampa, 182 the Rams, 183 Detroit, 184 New England, 185 Jacksonville, 186 Tennessee, 187 New England again. Stephen Means is taking it. Where are you taking him, Stephen?
186. To Tennessee. Some of that is just like the Buckeye connection there. I don't know. I don't think Ronnie Hickman was very good the second half of the season. I'll just start with it there. I thought his production after the bye week very much dropped off, and I thought it got a little worse every single week as the competition got better. And then through this draft process, at least from the stuff we've been able to see, I don't know how he helped himself. He didn't do anything at the combine except interviews. He didn't do anything at pro day, literally. He didn't do anything, not even interviews. He didn't run. He didn't do any position drills. He didn't do anything. So maybe he's done stuff in some of these, workouts with like individual workouts with teams and stuff, and we don't know that stuff. But I don't think he had a good last year. I don't think he helped himself in the draft process, at least from a public standpoint. So I don't know what his draft stock is. So I kind of based it on he had some good moments, and look at Jordan Fuller.
Yeah, Jordan Fuller is an interesting discussion point here for trying to find a range. So that's 186 to Tennessee for you, Stephen. Nathan, where'd you have him?
Later, I had him 206 to the Bengals, looking for a franchise that might need just some secondary depth, some safety depth. In particular, they've lost a couple guys there in free agency in this last round. I don't know that the geographic proximity to Columbus is a benefit or not here. They obviously have taken and had Ohio State guys cycling through that program. I think there's some relationship there. So this just seemed like a good place for someone. If you're drafting here and you're drafting a DB and you want a guy who's a safety with some versatility and a safety that still has some athletic upside, because I think that's always been there for him. Whether it got fully cashed in at Ohio State, I don't know. This just seems like a good pick to roll the dice on, and a guy who might be able to help you as a backup at multiple spots.
So you get into a lot of special teams kind of stuff here that's really going to matter. I don't think he's guaranteed to get picked. I think he probably will get picked, but there are guys all the time who you sort of expect, and then it doesn't quite happen for them. So you guys both have him in the 6th round. I have him early in the 7th. I have him at 219 to the Eagles, which would be the second pick in the 7th round. I think about a guy like Tyvis Powell, who I can remember on the 3rd day of the draft, like waiting. Tyvis Powell didn't get picked. And then he was like a priority free agent. He signed with Seattle, and he got to go. He was kind of there at the end of the Legion of Boom kind of stuff, and got to know Richard Sherman and Cam Chancellor, some of the guys, and had some good experiences. And then we know Tyvis ended up bouncing around a little bit, never really stuck in the NFL. I thought Tyvis Powell was a good player. And so what do I know? But I was a little bit surprised that Tyvis Powell didn't get drafted. So I'm trying to look at some of these, like not 1st round, not 2nd round type of Ohio State DBs of recent years. Shaun Wade was pick 160 in the 5th round. Jordan Fuller was pick 199 and turned out to be much more valuable than that for the Rams. Duran Grant as a corner, different, but he was pick 121 off that national title team as a 4th rounder to the Steelers. Christian Bryant, who I loved in college, and he had some injury issues, and if he hadn't been injured, he might have gone higher. He barely got picked. He was picked 241. Jamel Hines, who I loved in college as a, back when they were playing the star, kind of that hybrid nickel safety guy, was picked 158. And then a guy, I hadn't thought of it until right now, who I actually think is a pretty good comparison for Ronnie Hickman, is Kurt Coleman, who is just a good, solid college safety who would come up and make a play on you. He was picked 244, and he just kind of wasn't exactly an NFL player. And so I do think, to the point of, I don't know that Ronnie Hickman popped in draft prep. What do we know? But if there was a time where maybe coming out of the season, Steven, you might have been like, I don't know. I think maybe Ronnie Hickman, or mid-seasons, I think Ronnie Hickman could be like a fourth round pick. And it just feels like, again, what do we know? We are not NFL draft experts. It is not what we spend all of our days doing. But we wound up in round 6 or 7, where I think there was a time where the three of us might have wound up in round 4 or 5.
I wonder if he hurt himself coming back, because I do think context is everything. But he had 100 tackles last year. He was one of the few positive things about that 21 defense. Could he have played himself into being a 4th or 5th round pick in the 2022 draft? Then now we're talking about 6th round, 7th round, maybe not even drafted situations. Very Haskell Garrett like.
Yep. That is not a bad comparison at all.
It's not, but I also think that I always thought that Ronnie Hickman was a better football player than that, which is why I think he would maybe still sneak into the lower rounds here.
And we'll say Dane Brugler in The Athletic has Ronnie Hickman as the 18th safety and projected in the 5th or 6th round. So, that's a guy who does spend all of his time doing draft stuff year round. So he has him a little higher than we have him here. So just we'll keep that in mind. It matters.
In his actual mock, I think he has him 218th, first pick of the 7th round.
Oh, he does? Okay, in the actual mock. I was just looking at that. Okay. So, to the Bears, 218. So that's right in that range. And again, sometimes I just think once you start getting down there, it's like, what is it about you that makes a team pick you? And it doesn't mean that you're not a great player, but like what's like, oh, we got to go get that guy. I think sometimes you're better off being, having bad film, but being super fast, or having some questionable things, but or having a great game somewhere, having like a peak that somebody that can grab onto, where I think Ronnie Hickman just played some darn good football for multiple years for Ohio State. But once you get to the 5th, 6th, 7th round, is there a peak to grab onto? Which will bring us to the last guy. And I'll just ask it. Steven, do you think Cam Brown as a corner will get picked?
I don't. This is a bad combination of things. Not a lot of great play. He had some moments, but not great 40 time. Injury history. No, I don't think he gets picked. This might be a low number draft for Ohio State.
Nathan, do you think Cam Brown gets picked?
I did not predict him to get picked, nor did I predict Tanner McAllister who had a really good pro day, to work his way back into a pick. I think those are both UFAs.
So we don't have anybody else getting selected then. We have these top 7 guys as our picks. Cam Brown was invited to the combine. Tanner McAllister was not. I think the point about Cam just did not run the world's greatest 40 time, which is just matters in situations like this. And people really need corners, but sometimes you can also feel like there's a million corners in the world out there. And this is one of those situations where sometimes you get into like these small school guys, and it's like, oh, some guy from some Division III school got picked in the 4th round. It's like, you never even heard of that guy. Dane Brugler has Cam Brown at his number 34 cornerback going in the 7th round. And the 40 number that is down for Cam Brown in Dane's book at 4.56, that is slower than the 33 guys ranked ahead of him, right? So it's just one of those things. If he runs a 4.35 instead of a 4.55, I think we're having a different conversation because that kind of thing matters. So no draft pick for Cam. I would say who I think is – so we're projecting 7 Ohio State draft picks. I think maybe Tanner McAllister has a better chance to get picked than Cam Brown does, based in part on some of those testing numbers. Steven, you think that too?
I think I could see Tanner sneaking into that 7th round. And to be completely honest with you, if you flipped him, if Tanner McAllister has that combine invite and Cameron Brown doesn't, I might even move Tanner up to like 6th round just because he would have done those numbers twice. Because he's a guy who has to do everything just because of the position he's in. So if he runs a 4.43, 4.42 at the combine, or he does exactly what he did at the pro day at the combine, and then he runs a little bit better, does things a little bit better at Ohio State just because it's home turf, I think somebody takes a flyer on him and says, that worse, he's special teams.
Yeah, I think they look at him at kind of the same argument that I was making by Hickman. He's a guy that maybe could be a versatile safety and help you, even if you're not getting a starter, and he's not going to, who knows, develop to that level. Backup value in the secondary in the lower rounds makes a lot of sense.
Dane Brugler has Tanner McAllister as his 29th safety in this draft and as a projected free agent. Again, 4.47 listed for his 40 time compared to that 4.56 for Cam Brown. Doesn't mean these guys can't make rosters, right? All kinds of free agents make rosters. So Tanner McAllister is going to be in a camp. Cam Brown's going to be in a camp. Teron Vincent's going to be in a camp, right? There are going to be guys who are going to have opportunities. Maybe they get on a practice squad, and then you're in the practice squad for a little bit, and you hang around, and all of a sudden, there was a guy, Malcolm Pridgeon was a guy who was a transfer on the offensive line for Ohio State, who came from like a junior college in New York and came here and played for like a year or two. And it was like Malcolm Pridgeon was fine. I don't know. And then I was in the Browns locker room a couple years ago, like Malcolm Pridgeon was there because he was on the Browns practice squad. And I was like, man, Malcolm Pridgeon's like cashing an NFL check for even a day. That's great. So there are a couple more guys that we're not talking about get drafted who might cash some NFL checks, at least for, a couple weeks, couple months, couple years. And we hope those guys get to do that. But in the end, we're talking about 3 sure thing first rounders, maybe another 4th first rounder, but probably 6 guys in the top 3 rounds, which is pretty good. And then you get Ronnie Hickman as likely a 7th guy drafted, and we'll see if they maybe get an 8th or get a 9th. But for now, that's where we'll end this. We will come back. The plan is for the Tuesday pod. Again, if you guys are interested in this, maybe it's not your favorite thing, and that's fine too. But on Tuesday, we're going to do a full cleveland.com mock draft, and then we're going to put the same pod in our Browns podcast feed, our Bengals podcast feed, and our Buckeyes podcast feed, because it affects all these people. The Browns don't have a first-round pick. I actually think it's a more interesting Ohio State conversation than it is a Browns conversation. But our Browns writers are still going to be in it. And everybody else does a mock. We're going to do it too. So it's that time of year. It'll be fun. And then we'll come back and we'll have some pods later in the week after the draft where we'll discuss where CJ Stroud went, where Jaxon Smith-Njigba went, Paris and Dawand and Zach and everybody else. And we'll figure that out. We'll get those to you after they happen. We also know you are not in this podcast feed because you want 10 hours of NFL draft content this week. So guess what? We're going to talk about the Buckeyes in other ways too. But for now, make sure you're going to cleveland.com/OSU to read our stuff. Try the text if you haven't. Get subscribed to Buckeye Talk. And we appreciate you guys making us part of your Ohio State fandom. For Nathan Baird and for Stephen Means, I'm Doug Maurice, and that was Buckeye Talk.